Hello, Blaine Gray here. Today we're going to show you how to do some curved barrel ceilings. This is considered quite a tricky process of plastering, but if you follow the outlined steps in this video, then I can guarantee that you'll be able to get decent results. There are a few steps we need to follow. Now, first off, what you really don't want to do is just tackle the curved ceiling with just finished plaster. That is the biggest mistake that I think you can go wrong with. It needs a thick base to begin with. So what we're going to do is create the curve first, and we're going to use this plaster. Okay, so what we want to be using is a backing plaster. Now I'm using British gypsum bonding, which is designed to be used on low to medium suction backgrounds, which basically means plasterboard, existing walls, anything that hasn't got a lot of pull. Just mixed up a load of bonding, I've got it mixed up, nice thick consistency. And if you haven't got one of these, by the way, it's just a little paddle attachment that you whack on your drill. For any small mixes, this is so good because you don't have to get your big mixer out, big tub, it's perfect. I use it that much, I've actually broke it and it snapped off everywhere. This is how often I use this bad boy, and you wouldn't believe how frequently it's used. So if you haven't got one of these in your arsenal of tools, get one of them because they're really helpful. Stick to your combi, get a nice little mix on, it's all good. But we want thick consistency here. Like I said, the first rule, we need something that's thick to allow us to create that curve, and it's got to hold, it's got to have a lot of body to it. The thing is, if you use a simple finished plaster, it's not heavy enough and it's not going to hold the weight of itself, and it might fall down and you'll really struggle to create that curve. So let's crack on and see how we can get this done. Okay, so here's the ceiling we're working on. I've put a scrim tape on first. We always want a scrim tape on first. Two reasons. One, you want that to be bedded deep between the plasterboard and your bonding. Two, scrim tape hates sticking to dried bonding plaster. Don't know why, but it's a real flaw and it's a real pain in the ass. So make sure scrimming is done first. Right, so we've got the bonding. I'm gonna push it deep into that scrim, push it hard. So we're gonna come up one way, and I like to come back on myself. So let me speed that up. So I'm coming up on the first stroke, coming back on myself, taking out any lines. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I like to apply one way, come back. And what I find with curves, I'm going to get a better curve if I follow on the backstroke. So if I'm coming forward the traditional way, the backstroke is where I get a nicer, cleaner curve. Now, I can't fully tell you why that works, but for myself, in my own experience, that's what I'm finding. So what you might find once you've done a little trail is some low spots. Now I've got a section here where this line isn't working, so I need to fill in a bit further. I'm going to apply it with the back, finish on the back stroke there. Now what I'm going to do is start to refine that curve. I want that curve to run through perfect all the way. I don't want any lines. I don't want any high or low spots, because this base coat is the most important coat in terms of getting that curve right on that ceiling. So again, I've got a bit of a low section here. I'm going to plant it in the middle, come up and get that perfect curve on the way back. Again, that backstroke is crucial. Again, a little bit of a low spot there. Fill it in. There we go. So it's kind of a two-part process. I roughly apply it first, and then what I want to do is come back on myself and refine that curve and try and get it as clean as possible. My aim here is to make it consistent all the way through. And again, if I can get the majority of the hard work done at this stage, then it's going to be a lot easier for the later processes of plastering. Again, I think all the work's done here. And not only that, you get a little bit of practice in making sure that curve's bang on. Again, now what I want to do is scrape back any high spots that I might have at the bottoms. Come back. And you end up with this nice, smooth curve. What I'm doing is just refining that now. Again, getting a nice curve on the backstroke. For some weird reason, I'm finding that the result's a lot better. There's a bit of a line there, I'm going to refine that. And what you want to do is start at one point and work forward. That is left with a nice curve that's running through. We've got a nice line running through to the bottom. It's slightly lower here, but it's a bit of a dip in the ceiling. I kind of want the curve to run at the same level throughout as well. I don't want it to be sporadic or running off line, running off center. I want that curve to look the same. Even though it's all going to look blended in when it's plastered, we want that to be running through. So imagine there's a line, an imaginary line from that end to that end, from the top to the front edge. We want them to run through at an equal distance so it looks right to the eye. Okay, so this is a point now where we're still carrying on with the bonding. So let me reiterate what we went through in the last bit. We're applying it to begin with. Then we're going to come back on ourselves, start filling in any low spots. And then from there, we're going to refine that curve with a backstroke. Now, again, I don't know why that is the case, but for me, coming back on myself with the trowel is a much nicer, smoother curve. But this is what can go wrong when you start doing this in bonding. Can you see there's a little bit of a lump there? Let's see what happens. So this might happen. We might get a section where, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, there's a little bit of a sag in this section. Now that's where the bonding isn't sticking to the scrim tape. That's why we really have to push that bonding into the scrim, because if it don't, you get this potential sagging effect where the curve pulls away from itself, and that's because it's not stuck in tightly to the scrim. You need to put a lot of pressure on that initial pull, push it deep into the scrim, deep into that curve, and that's why we come back on ourselves to shaping it up. So what I'm going to do is apply that bonding, push it right into that curve, and then start again. So that's it, we've bonded the curves out, we've got that initial shape, and we've got that set and that basis ready for the top coat to go onto. Now there's some things we've got to consider, and this is where it can go horribly wrong if you don't. Number one, make sure that bonding is fully set and cured before you do anything else. The worst thing you can do is start applying finished plaster to damp bonding. What happens is the bonding might move underneath, it creates air pockets, and you get all these bubbles that show up in the finished coat of plaster. Now you've got to wait for that to dry completely until it's set, because there's quite a lot of depth on that curve and there's a lot more than what you'd probably think. Way around it, if you want to speed it up, throw some cement in with your bonding plaster. The amount you throw in dictates how fast it's going to go off. Trust me, it's good stuff and it works rapid. So if you only want it to go off a small amount, then throw a bit of cement in, say a handful. But if you really want it to go off, throw a bit in until it's really dark in colour, get a patch on, and it'll be gone, dried in about 4, 5, 10 minutes. Trust me, it's a really good hack. But it takes a knack and getting used to how much cement you want to put with the bonding. So if you want to see a video of that, by the way, let me know about that and I'll probably post it in the future. The other thing is you have to be on the game with how you apply your plaster. There's a lot of flicking action there. You've got to flick with the wrist, come back on yourself. You can break it up by doing it one way, completely pull the trowel off, come back again. But you have got to be on your A game in terms of application. So if you are brand new to plastering, and if you want a masterclass on how to apply plaster faster, getting used to how to use your trowel, getting used to the basics of applying plaster, which is going to make this 10 times easier, and check out the link below. I've got a free video which hasn't been released on YouTube, which is all yours, where I'll show you the basics on how to get beginners applying plaster more efficiently and in a way that is probably easier for you if you're brand new. So click that if you are new. Now again, I'm going to wait for this to dry. A lot of prep to do in this place, so I'm going to put the beads on, wait for it to dry, and then probably come back tomorrow. So we'll continue this tomorrow. So there's been a slight change of plan. Basically I decided to get some plaster on. Now this is probably breaking all the rules that you've ever heard. You always start with the ceilings first, but when I was prepping, didn't have enough beads to finish the other rooms, and I thought, you know what, I'll get a mix on with what I can do. So I got some of the walls on, and with that I'm going to show you why you should always do ceilings first. What I'm going to do is, again, starting from probably unconventional methods, I'm going to start with the lower half walls, and I'm going to do the ceilings after. So I'm going to show you that why in a minute. But the first thing, now one of the main issues is when we're plastering here is the fact we've got the walls plastered beforehand. You've got a bigger probability that you're going to drop a bit of plaster. Now it doesn't matter, but what we're going to do is just, this bit's the easy bit. I'm just going to work to the left first. I'm going to try my best not to get plaster on my newly plastered walls. But what we're going to do is get as high as we can towards the top of that ceiling as possible. Now, what I want is to close a gap between the top, and I want as much and as close to that curve I can get as possible. So I'm going to show you why in a minute. But for now, we're just going to get the bottoms on. Again, focusing on getting the walls as plaster free as possible. So we're going to just get the bottoms first, working up to that curve. So we're going to come right to the bottom of that ceiling, come as high as we can. I'm going to try and reach as close to that curve as possible, and that is going to reduce how much movements we make at the top. Now I'm going to explain that in a minute, but we're coming up. Again, because this is a sloped ceiling, the angle of the trowel changes ever so slightly. Now that is something that you have to learn with experience. That's something you'll learn the more you do it. But like I said, we're aiming to get as high up to that curve as possible, almost meeting just where that curve point is. Now the reason we've got these plugs on this ceiling is because they've had to use insulated board. So they've put the washers on to basically hold the boards in place. So that's why the washers are on the ceiling, if you're wondering what they're about. It's basically insulated board just to get the U values needed for this loft conversion. I've got the bottoms done now. The reason I like to work that way is I've got an end point. So now I can start from where we finished off, curve, come back on myself to finish into the line we've just done. So let's do that again, curving round, coming back into the line we just created. Now we're going to have 2 coats of plaster on this, so the curve wants to be pretty good, but it doesn't need to be perfect. But what I'm doing is the exact same thing as what we did before, following up around the curve and then coming back with the trowel. And I just find that is the best way to get that even distribution of plaster, to get that nice curve, that follows around the bonding. Now, this is sticking nicely to that layer of bonding we've created. It's got a nice grip to it. It wants to hold onto it. If that was wet, if that was just plaster and you were getting onto it when it's damp, you wouldn't have that grip. Because it's got a pull, because the bonding is high suction, it wants to grip onto that plaster and it holds it. That's why using this as a base is so important, because you can feel it grip into itself. So again, we've got the line of finished plaster. I've got something to work to. Come all the way around, back on myself, and that way we've got a seamless stream of plaster, which is why I like to start from the bottom at first. We know where we're going to finish off to when we're up here, and we can curve into it, back on ourselves, finishing onto that finish line. And the idea is here we're taking a less amount of trips up and down a ladder, otherwise we're just guessing what we can reach. But here, we know exactly what we're working to, and we're just focusing on getting that curve right. So that way we don't have to worry too much about the distance below. We can stay close to the curve without worrying about filling the rest of the ceiling. So the principles are the same. We're getting it applied, applying the plaster upwards, coming back on ourselves for that curve. And again, it's getting used to that trowel angle, which is why the masterclass we've done, which is in the link below, is so important. And getting used to using different techniques for applying plaster is crucial for anything like this, or in general plastering as it is. Okay, so the first coat is on. Now, again, nothing new here, but what I'd like to say, when I first started doing curved ceilings, I was doing it all wrong. First off, it was my friend's dad's house, the first one I did. I bought a crappy B&Q bucket, snapped, got water all over the floor. Should have known from that point it was a bad luck omen, but I used to just do straight in with plaster without using any bonding, and what you'll find is the thickness is, one, it creates a bit of sagging on the curve, but two, you'll never have that nice, finished, smooth, rounded look if you were just to use plaster. That bonding, it allows you to create that curve and get a nice, smooth finish with and without it. So basically, that's how I found this method to be the best, and I think really you should follow along and try it for yourself. Now the plaster's on. What we're doing now is just getting that initial flatten. To be honest, the hard work is done. The hard work is getting that curve applied and making sure you've got a nice slope coming all the way around. Now the big problem is you don't want too much thickness on the curve. If you do, what you need to do now is let that curve take up. Let the plaster dry a little bit. The worst thing you want to do is jump on it when it's wet, Because what you'll do is you'll start deforming that curve that you've put in. That needs to set a little bit, which is why I use 1 coat PVA quite thin. We're not fully killing the suction on the bonding. Like I said, 1 coat PVA, it's held it back, but what it's going to do is still going to have the grip. It's going to hold onto that plaster and make sure it maintains its shape. So that is a big hack when you're doing it. And now all we're doing, like I said, just coming up, smoothing what we've got. Nothing crazy now, nothing you haven't seen or done before. Just coming back and just smoothing out the plaster we've put on. Like I said, the hard bit's done. All we're doing now is just making it nice and flat and just continue to keep playing at it, working at it. But generally, hard work's done. But there are some few tips you can take when we're curving it off. Now this is when we start to refine the curve. Now it's pulling in a little bit, which means you can put a bit more pressure in. What you want to do is push that plaster into the bonding to keep that curve nice and tight. We don't want too much excess plaster. So again, pushing it right in there. This is why we need to let it dry a little bit. I'm not talking hours, but you need to give it a little bit of time to take up before you start playing with it. Because that way, the thicker the plaster, because this area is going to be thicker than the rest of the wall, at least it's had a bit of time to take up. Now what you will find is some low spots, especially on the curves. I'm going to fill them in now. You want to make sure it's tight all the way through and there's no holes. What you'll find as you start troweling, you'll start finding some low spots because the plaster moves and it's rearranging itself, and that's fine. As long as you fill them in now, you don't want to do it later because you're going to run out of time. Like I said, this is going to set at a decent pace and you want it to set, but you want to make sure you're ahead of curve, pun intended, and then we make sure that everything's filled in nicely. And in terms of the movement of the trowel, it's not necessarily a flick. What you'll find now is the trowel just wants to follow the wall. It's not wet anymore. All you're doing is keeping a loose wrist and making sure that you're following the contours of that curve. And you're not really forcing anything at this point. We're pushing the plaster into itself, but we're not forcing the shape. Now it's hard to describe, but it's something you probably just have to learn for yourself. When you start plastering corners, you'll find that your wrist should be relaxed. You've got a tight grip, but your wrist is relaxed and moving with the curve. So again, tight grip, you're holding tight to the trowel, but your wrists have got a flow and they're happy to follow around. Now this is probably the most important part because this is where we need to fill in the gaps. After this, all we're doing is troweling to make it look smooth. So like I said, this, you should have a nice smooth curve running through now. Without any holes, without too many lines, we need to start making it look refined, start making it look nice. So again, just work through it and take your time at this stage. This stage you want to take the most amount of time because you don't want any work after this. All we're doing after this is just polishing up. So this is it, that's pretty much the end of the process. What I will say finally is when you're getting that curve, don't be scared to use a bit of water. Because we had a super absorbent layer of bonding, it is going to pull in a bit faster. So what I like to do is just moisten that curve up with the water brush, and that really pulls out any last minute lines that you might not have managed to get. And it really helps to give it that smooth look and that smooth rounded finish. So don't be scared to use a water brush, especially since it will pull in a bit with the bonding. And that's it. That is how you get nice, smooth, curved ceilings. I know it's hard to see on camera, but I hope you can see that we've got a pretty good curve there. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and hit the like button for some more. Thank you.